Hey class, Dr. Blake Nilsson. Welcome to this week's module. We're talking about net present value. Just to dive right in, what net present value does is it takes a look at a project or something you want to build to sell, and it really looks at if it's worth it. So normally to look at something if it's worth it, we would say, okay, what are the cash flows? What's the income? And that's perfect. We've gone over some of those techniques up to this point in the class. But where net present value takes it further, you see here we're going to figure out the cash flows here in a bit. But in addition to the cash flows or the income we bring, we say, okay, look, we have $1 million sitting in the bank. We have two options. We can either put it into a project or invest it in what's known as the interest rate or the discount rate. So in the little write-up, I gave the example of 5%. So let's just say that, for example, that you had a discount or interest rate of 5%. That means, and let's just say it was a bond. We don't only want to know what we can make on this project over here, or this project, but we want to know what we can make above the 5%, or the value above that, that we could make in this other thing that we have going on. So that's what we're going through this week, is understanding how to decide if a project is worth it based on the discount rate or the interest rate that we could make on that same money somewhere else. So to go through that, we're just going to do a problem, and I'll show you. So we just have a project here. It takes us $2 million to develop it, $750,000 to ramp it up, and then marketing and support. One thing to notice when you're going through, this is per year. So this isn't a one-time charge, but this is every year. A unit production cost of 75 with the price of 135, and here's our demand or our forecast for years 3, 4, and 5 once we sell our project. And in this example, we assume that we have another investment that we could make a 12% return on. And so we want to know, one, obviously, is this going to make a good positive cash flow and make a profit? And then two, how much are we going to make over that 12% we could make elsewhere? All right, so to do that, let's just break this down. We take these numbers. I always give you a project schedule, and so you know how to move these numbers over to our project schedule. This is basically a profit and loss statement up to this point until we get to the NPV. So we just put it in as such. So revenue is going to be our only revenue or plus, and then all of these are going to be our costs. So we're at the end going to do our profit, which is going to be our revenue minus all of our costs. So let's just go at it. So development costs, this is broken down into 2 years, year 1 and year 2. So we're going to go equals the 2 million divided by 2, because it's broken down into 2 years. And then I'm going to absolute value that B2. I did that with F4 on a PC or Command T on a Mac, and I drag that over. Okay, so that's 1 million. Now, just a quick note here is if I gave you a problem and say it was broken up into quarters, you would have year 1 and then 4 quarters here, and then year 2 and 4 quarters. Rather than divided this 2 million by 2, we would then, if we had 2 years it was going and 4 quarters, a column for each of those, you would divide it by 8. So if it was half years, you would divide it by 4 because you have 4 cells here that it's broken up over. Okay, ramp up costs, it's going to equal our 750,000. It's just one time. Okay, marketing and support, that's where I told you. This is every year. And so we just do that and then we drag it over, and it's the same thing as up here with the development costs. If it was broken up into different intervals, you would divide it by those intervals. So this is going to equal 500,000. Hit enter, and then we absolute value that and drag it on over. Okay, production cost. So with production cost, we're going to have for year 3, it's going to be our total units that we're going to produce times how much it costs to produce it. Okay, it's going to equal total units we produced times how much it costs to produce it. going to equal units times cost. All right, and the same thing goes true here if this was in halves. Rather than just having this, I'd have to put parentheses around this and then divide it by 2 because there's 2 halves in the year if it was broken down like that, divided by 4 if it was quarters. All right, so now revenue is going to equal times our price. So to get revenue, we just do price times units sold. So equals units sold times price, and equals units sold times price. All right, I do like to have, and then make. All right, so we can see our revenue versus our cost, and that's for our units that we produce. And I've already broken that down. Remember, once again, this is clean years. I know I keep on saying that, but it's the biggest mistake I see is if I see, if I give a problem where it's broken down in half years, for example, just to remember that there would be 2 columns here under year 3, half 1, half 2, and then for this you would divide it by 2 for each half. Now in addition here, one thing I'll state, as you can see in this problem, the volume or the forecast of units produced changes in the 3 years, years 3, 4, and 5. You can also similarly have a cost of the product could change from year to year, and the price could change from year to year. And if that was the case, it would say unit production cost year 3, year 4, year 5, and have the different numbers, or price year 3, year 4, year 5, and the different numbers in the project. I'm not going to try to do anything to trick you on these. It's all going to be straightforward and right here in the table to what to put over in the graph. So, or in this breakout here. So now cash flow. Let's make this a little bigger so it's the whole thing. Okay, so cash flow, it's just going to equal our revenue minus all of our costs. So we just do that by going revenue minus this cost minus this cost. Okay. 2 ways to do that. That's the first way. And there's also another way. I'll just undo that and show you the other way. It's going to equal the revenue minus the sum of all of your costs. So the exact same thing, this one's just revenue, then you add up all the costs and you subtract it from the revenue. So whichever one makes more sense to you, go for it. All right, so that gets us to our cash flows. So first off, as we look at this project, we think to ourselves, is this project worth it, yes or no? Well, right off the bat, we're going to think it's a yes, because when I go over all of these cells, it shows me right here that my profit, or the sum of all those cells, is about $3 million. Okay, but remember, we put a lot of money into this project. It's a 5-year project. We put a lot of money in these first couple years. So that's where it comes down to net present value. Is it worth it versus putting that money elsewhere? So that's what we're going to break down here. And to do that, NPV formula, there's one tricky part of it. I would write this down just so you remember as you're doing it for the assignment and test. So I go NPV, the rate, this one is just the 12%. Another note here, if we were broken down into quarters, then we would divide by 4. If it was months, if we had a single month for every year in a column for such, we divide by 12. If it was half years, we divide it by 2. So, but here, since it's clean, we just take the interest rate, since we're in clean years, and we just take it as the 12%. Now, comma. All right, so here's the one tricky part. You grab all the cash flows and you just highlight them. You don't do them one by one. You grab all of them except the first one. The reason why is you cannot discount a cash flow in the current period, and so you have to add that one back after. Now, one thing I will state here, it's always the first period, not the first year. So if this was half years, you wouldn't leave out the first 2 and add them back. You would just leave the first half of year 1. If it was quarters, the first quarter of year 1. And so you always just leave one cell out, and then you grab the rest of them, the cash flows, and you drag them. You close out the parenthesis for net present value, and then you add back the original cash flow that you have. So that just breaks it into net present value. Once you do that, you can hit enter. All right, and we have 1.4 million. So remember, what is this number really telling us? We remember our total profit on the project was $3,050,000. So the difference between this number and this number is discounting these cash flows at 12%. So this number in essence means we're making 1.4 million more on our money than if we would have just put it into our other 12% investment. So in this case, at 1.4 million over what we would have made doing elsewhere, we're still only making the 3 million bucks. That hasn't changed, but we're making this much more than investing our same money at 12% elsewhere. And so we would definitely do this project. Now there is two things you have to consider in the real world whether or not to do a project or think about it more. And that is the riskiness of the interest or discount rate, this 12% that's here, and the riskiness of the project. Because remember, this is all projections and forecast. And so you do have to weigh that in a little bit to understand if it's something you would still want to do based on the riskiness of both of those, and that may sway you one way or the other. But most likely in this scenario, the 1.4 million over the 12%, this is definitely a project we're going to proceed with and go forward with. And then the other thing is, it's even possible that you had a negative net present value and you would still do the project. Let's say you're a company that you have to come out with a new model every year, the iPhone, right? So Apple has to come out with an iPhone every year, and they're probably making money on it. But you're a company like that every year you've got to do the new model. If so, even with a negative net present value, you may consider and still do the project because you're probably still making a profit on it, and you're doing it for the long-term sustainability of your company. So the way we would answer this, what is the net present value? A, we'll call it. Let's just grab this, Control C, copy it down here as a number, and make it dollars. So that is $1.4 million, or almost 1.5. All right, so now part B. Let's assume I asked you to get a little bit trickier and say, okay, all of a sudden your company decides that you can only really sell 80% of what you thought, or you were off by 20%. What would be the new net present value, and is the project worth it? The way we do that, we just grab these cells and we go equal 40,000 now times 0.8, or 80% of the original forecast. Same with the 50,000 times 0.8, and the 40,000 times 0.8. All right, so 377,000. I'm going to copy this down, make it dollars. All right, so at 377,000 over what you could make with the 12%, again, assuming the risk level is the same on these two things, we would still definitely go with the project because we're making 377,000 more than we would investing, even though our profit has gone down by quite a bit, almost half, from 3 million to 1.4. But still, it's better than investing that money elsewhere. So by 377,000 bucks. So let's go and say, assuming our original values, so we'll get rid of these 0.8s. All right, so 40, 50, and 40 again, and then part C. Let's just say that, okay, all of a sudden there was a drastic change in the supply and demand curve, and you can't charge the 135 that you were thinking. You can only sell your units for 120 bucks. Is the project still worth it? I click on this and I make it 120 for the unit price. Everything should update, and as you can see, it went down to 99,000 bucks. So I'm going to Control C, paste it, make it $1. All right, so now the question becomes a little bit closer because we're still 100,000. Once again, risk level is the same. I'm still doing this, but let's say that you got an answer like $9,508 or something, right, for this. And would it be worth it? At 10 grand, that's where it becomes very questionable. Okay, because there's so much money here. If their risk is about the same and it's 10 grand that you're making on your net present value, meaning 10,000 over what you can make with your money elsewhere, that's where you really dig down and say, okay, how secure is the discount or interest rate? How secure is this project? Does our company need to do this project anyway, or is this something that's optional for us? What's it going to do to personnel? This is where it's a lot deeper of a conversation. And obviously, you have some of that conversation with all projects, but you really have to analyze as the net present value gets closer to zero, whether or not a project is worth it. So just to reiterate, going through this process, go step by step and double check your numbers as you go. And best of luck, and we'll talk to you soon.